Hey guys, Nick here from Nick's Taxes. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm an accountant trying to make YouTube videos on personal finance and tax tips for you. And speaking of accountants, did you know that they are some of the strongest people in the world? It's true. While they're unable to move a mountain, they are able to budget. No? Maybe? Well, that's the purpose of today's video. We're going to talk about budgeting. From my experience, I think budgeting is very important, although very few of us actually do budget. Studies show that people who actually budget are better off financially and less likely to fall into debt. And plus, while we've been in lockdown, I've been reading some articles that, that say something like, what I wish I knew when I was in my 20s, and all of them at least mention one part about being in better control of their finances. So that's why I'm making this video. We're going to talk about how to budget, and assuming that you don't already budget, we're going to start with the very basics in this video, and we'll create a few more different videos on budgeting at a later time. But let's jump right into it and let's get started.
So in my last video where I give my 4 steps to building wealth, one of the 4 pillars that I have is building a budget. I think it's very important, and the quicker you start building a budget, the better off you'll be. The first thing that we want to do is determine why you want to budget. What's the reason why? What are you going to have out of it? What are your goals? Some of those decisions might be short term, some of them might be medium term, some of them might be long term, some of them might be, habits that you want to draw out over the next little bit of your life. So some examples that we might have, could be finding ways to save more money. It might be trying to stop living paycheck to paycheck. It might be trying to get out of debt, trying to avoid spending money you don't have, maybe staying on track towards your long financial goals. Whatever it may be, find your why and write that down. And then when you build your budget, the reason why you're building it is going to really drive how your budget looks. So our step 1 to creating a budget is going to be listing out your fixed monthly expenses. So many of us have expenses that stay the same from month to month. So some examples for you might include rent, car payment, cable bill, gym fee, other type of membership fees, student loan payment. So start by jotting these down either in a notebook or on a spreadsheet or in some type of budgeting app, and just jot them down along with the prices. If you're unsure about how much you're spending on these things, it should be quite easy to look up. Just consult your most recent bill or statement regarding that item. Next is to list your variable monthly expenses. So these are expenses that fluctuate from month to month. They can be a little bit harder to budget since you're not just copying, pasting each month what that amount will be. So you kind of want to go through your variable expenses. You kind of want to look through your credit card, your bank statements, maybe go through a calendar to kind of figure out how much you spent on certain things over the past few months or over the past year, and kind of come up with an average. Some examples of variable expenses would include things like maybe your utility bill, your cell phone, the money you spend on food, clothing, leisure, fuel for your car, personal grooming like haircuts, things of that nature, maybe birthday gifts, Christmas gifts, all those things. So you're going to want to find an average. So while you might spend the same amount of money during each month on things like groceries or gas, some things, like your utility bill might vary quite a bit over the seasons. So, I want you to do your best to average out how much you're going to be spending on a monthly basis, because there's going to be times where these variable expenses might be more expensive and times where they might be less expensive. Or it could be, an example could actually be a gym membership where you might just pay once a year up front. And so you want to factor that in as well and not forget about it, because if you kind of leave it out of your budget, by the time that annual subscription comes around, it's not going to fit in your budget. So you kind of want to create that buffer space now before that happens later. Factoring in one-time expenses, the best way to do that is, find out how much that yearly expense is, divide it by 12, and throw it into your budget. So now we have our once a year expenses, we have our variable expenses, and we have our fixed expenses. Now we want to figure out how much we're bringing home, our take-home pay. And then we're going to be subtracting our total costs from our total take-home pay. I want you to look at how much you're bringing home from your paycheck. Don't take your gross income, take the amount of money you're bringing into your bank account after taxes, and then also consider any type of investment income or side hustle income you might have. And then compare it against your total costs. And if your spending exceeds your earnings, you know right off the bat that you're going to have a problem. And ideally, you should be aiming to have a little bit left over after paying all your bills. If you don't have a specific goal in mind, a great rule of thumb is trying to have about 20% of your take-home pay towards saving. And within that 20%, you want to have 15% ideally towards long-term investing, such as retirement, and then the rest would be towards other savings goals. Now, again, everyone's budget is going to look different, and we'll go over a few examples in later videos. If you don't really have any type of savings goals, try to get 20% of your take-home pay into savings. That's going to be the best way to start. You know, if a hospital finds that they're spending too much, the easiest way to boost up their budget is for them to cut coroners. But for us, if we find out we're spending too much money month to month, we need to find ways to cut corners, not coroners. And so if you do find you're spending too much money, or you're barely scraping by, or you want to be able to find more money to save, you're going to need to examine that budget and figure out ways to trim costs. So this could mean slashing a major expense, or it could be making a series of smaller changes, like spending less on entertainment, or maybe getting a cheaper phone package, whatever that might be. Maybe cutting more coupons, buying cheaper products at the grocery store compared to the brand name products, whatever. But the best thing to do is actually look at your fixed expenses, and if you realize you're spending too much on a fixed expense, there might be some options for you to really cut that down. And one example might be with rent. If you're spending too much money on rent, you might want to consider getting a roommate, cutting that rent expense in half. Or if you're spending a lot on a car and you have this big car payment, consider selling that car, getting something cheaper. And then that way you're going to save a lot of money. Instead of making a lot of small series of changes on your variable spending, you can make one big change on your fixed spending. Whatever floats your boat, but your ultimate goal is you're trying to free up around 20% of your income for savings. So however that might look for you, it doesn't matter, as long as you're able to fit your budget and be comfortable with how you're spending your money and what you're doing. And then lastly is, every few months, I'm going to say every quarter, which is every 3 months, you should review your budget. So your budget shouldn't be the sort of thing that you kind of set and forget. Rather, it's an ongoing work in progress. Your expenses are going to evolve over time, right? And you're going to need to budget to reflect those numbers, right? So that means, your lease might end mid-year, or your rent increases by a couple dollars a month, or you're saving up for, a new vacation or something. You're going to need to account for that change. You want to kind of continue to adjust. It's going to continue to be a work in progress, especially when you first start. You're going to be wanting to tweak things to find out what works for you. Maybe you were too ambitious and you cut too much of your entertainment budget, right? So you want to build that out a little bit more, or so on and so forth. But the most important thing is getting started and then tweaking it over time. So it's quite simple to get started, as we've gone through. And, this ultimately is going to get you in a better position to be more on top of your finances. So the best thing I recommend is doing this through an Excel spreadsheet. Some might do it through some type of notepad, or some might use an app. Whatever you do, just keep track of your spending. And if you have any questions, have any comments, let me know in the comment section below. And I will be creating a few more videos on budgeting. We'll go over some different budgeting techniques, some tricks, some traps, and I might bring in some other people as well to give their 2 cents on budgeting. But this is just a really basic overview to get you guys started, and we'll go more in depth in later videos. So thanks so much for watching. If you got value out of this video, please smash the thumbs up button, and I will see you guys in the next video. Cheers.